Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe, and do consider supporting the channel via PayPal or Patreon. You'll find the links in the video description. I'd like to show you another game by Paul Morphy, the great American chess genius who shook up the European chess world in 1858, 1859. And this is from his match against Daniel Harrwitz, who was one of the leading European players at that time. This is not spectacular. It's not an opera house game. There aren't crashing sacrifices. That wasn't always Morphy's way. You know, actually he had very nice technique and positional understanding. However, he had a couple of dodgy moments in this game. Anyway, without further ado, so Daniel Harrwitz playing white, d4, and Morphy played f5. It's interesting. Fischer said of Morphy, perhaps his only weakness was in closed games like the Dutch defence. There we go, it's on the board. But even then, he was usually victorious because of his resourcefulness. And as a summary of this game, that is pretty good. I mean, he said that, generally, but it very much sums up this game, actually. And yeah, the Dutch defences he played didn't always work out very well. Here, I like bishop b4, which looks like a pretty decent nimzo to me. But bishop b7. Now, of course, in the Dutch, very often the problem in this variation certainly is what do you do with that queen's bishop. Morphy goes for a fianchetto, and it sort of turns out okay. Knight h5 looks a bit strange, but actually it's a good move just to exchange off this bishop, and that clears the back rank as well. Still, it just feels more pleasant for white because, white's kingside isn't really in any danger. d6, nevertheless, black is developing okay. If I were white, I would be looking to try to push forward with e4. That's usually the break you want to achieve. f4, however, and that looks to my eyes a little bit strange, because it potentially, weakens lots of squares around the king side. Nevertheless, it's kind of an ambitious move. Here, this is really bizarre. Morphy goes for knight c6. I don't see what's wrong with knight d7 heading to f6. Maybe e4 or g4 would come anyway. But knight c6 definitely looks a bit odd to me. So there you go. Fischer was right, I think. And here, I think a3 is a sensible move, just to cut out knight b4. And then I think the knight is just a bit misplaced on c6, blocking the bishop. Anyway, Harrwitz was in a hurry. He played g4. Knight b4. Now it's a little bit tricky. That knight can reroute. I think bishop b1 has to be the right move. And the knight is going to be booted back here. But anyway, Harrwitz took, and that's definitely an error, because it means that black finds counterplay on the e file. And on the king side too. Not that this is in any way fatal, but it's an irritant for white. He's just got to look after his king side now. Queen f2 pushes the queen back. Of course, the endgame should be very comfortable for white. So Morphy, keeps some attacking chances. d5 is a good move, cutting out the bishop from the king side. Rook h6, okay, mate threatened, but it's not a big deal. Queen f3, again, white looking to play an endgame. And if check, then the king just bounces up. This is quite a long game, and this kind of prelude. These aren't critical moves, but we'll get to the interesting part in a second. And well, now I think basically Morphy turns on the style. This knight gets pushed back, which looks pretty dreadful. And if that knight stays there, then things are, well, would not be at all good for black. But Now we see that, and very nice manoeuvre. This knight finally reaches d7, where it should have been a long time ago, and is heading for the king side. So nice manoeuvring. I mean, here Harrwitz plays knight g3. Knight d4, strikes me as being a good idea. Beautiful octopus knight, but actually it's not so clear after rook c8 with the idea c6 and knight f6. Actually, black is in the game there. But knight g3, I think Harrwitz, I think understandably was actually concerned about his king and just shutting out the black's queen here. Attacks this pawn, g6, king f2, knight f6, and here's the point. He can play rook h1 to get rid of the queen. Knight check, and rook takes rook. So Harrwitz has basically made sure that that there isn't any pressure on the king here. But this knight is still coming into a nice square on g4, and magically Morphy's pieces actually look quite decent here. Yeah, if e4 here, e4 generally, in so many positions in the Dutch with white, that's the move you want to achieve, because that will liberate white's pieces and force a way through to into the enemy camp basically. But queen h4 is a problem here, threatening the knight, and if knight f1 then queen f2 check is winning for black. So first of all, queen d2, so that covers this square. So after queen h4, this is the game. Knight f1 covers h2, but also f2 is threatened. And actually, the position is still roughly level. White is okay here. Rook e8. g3 pushes the queen back. Well, it actually doesn't push the queen back here. Queen h3, but he would like to play queen g2 here. But after this, actually, c6, and this bishop comes into the game. And I think it's because of that that Harrwitz plays here b5. He was concerned about this move. And then on the next turn, he wants to get in queen g2 to either push the queen back or get an endgame. And this does lock the bishop out of play. Knight f6, so there's no more attack. But nice maneuvers with this knight, so taking some control over this square. Queen g2. So yeah, finally the queen will either have to go back or exchange, and Morphy decides to exchange. Okay, so why did he suddenly go for the endgame? What's the difference? Okay, here's your moment. Here's your question of the video. How did Morphy play from this position? So, so far, a very tight game. No real blunders at all. One could quibble with some of the moves, but it's been a very close, tight manoeuvring game. But what did Morphy come up with now? It's from this moment that he takes control in the game and shows that, he just hadn't such a good understanding. a6. And now we see the disadvantage of playing this move. a4. Pawns exchanged and rook a8. So he's just managed to get a nice open file for himself. Now, this is a very long way from an advantage for black. At the moment, this bishop is a pretty poor piece. The knight is beautifully placed, but claiming the open file is absolutely crucial. So knight d2, rook a3. Well, white's pieces also are really, nothing to write home about. So Harrwitz decides to open things up with e4. I mean, this rook is annoying. There is potential, well, I mean, the rook could certainly place itself here, meaning that the knight wouldn't be able to move. This knight has options to come in here. This bishop can play itself around here, and, you know, maybe black can go for h6 and g5 later on. There are ways for black to try to improve the position. It's all to do with that rook. So Harrwitz decides to break with e4. You know, he's desperately looking for a bit of activity. You know, it's always that dilemma as a defender. Do you sit tight or do you break out? Rook c3. Hits that pawn. I mean, on the surface of things, it still doesn't look that bad for white, because yes, this rook is active, but that bishop is dreadful. But watch what happens. Bishop f3, threatening to invade. You know, and that is serious counterplay. Well, in fact, after rook takes, check, and then rook b8, that bishop is lost. So bishop king f7. And now rook e4. So Harrwitz wants to, you know, maintain activity. But of course now the bishop comes into play. g4 is an option here to stop the bishop coming in, but, you know, it means that king doesn't have a lot of cover. You know, it's quite a committal move. Again, it's always difficult for the defender. You know, do you push? Do you sit? Bishop e2 played. Bishop f5. And now h5. So the bishop has secured a beautiful position on f5. g4 simply not possible. And now white is looking really restricted with, you know, black's pieces as they are. But still, you know, how do you win? How does black actually win the thing? Everything seems protected. But watch. King f6. King comes forward. Rook d2. Bishop c2. So maybe looking to come around here. King e1. Now bishop b3 might be good, but the way that Morphy plays is even more convincing. Bishop e4. So watch how black is in control here. Rook threatens here. So the king comes back. And he's made room for his king. So you can see how black's pieces totally dominate white's pieces now. So instead of going for, you know, an easy pawn grab, he's just turning the screw beautifully. Rook a2, seeking activity. But Morphy is too quick. h4. So that pawn has to be taken. King takes f4. The king gets further into the position. Rook a7, and now third rank is clear. The rook switches. So often a deadly idea. And this is now a beautiful, deadly attacking trio. The rook switches to attack the king. Rook takes pawn. Rook check. Black doesn't even need to bother with material here. And king e3, white resigned. Such a nice end to that game. You know, beautiful technique from Paul Morphy. Let's just see what would happen if bishop f1, the rook switch again. Very important technique. Threatening mate, and, you know, there's no decent defense. Great attack. So when you think of a Morphy attack, it's not just about the F-file or the Evans Gambit or, you know, whatever. He was capable of doing this kind of attack as well. An uneven game. You know, the first half of the game, there were inaccuracies. Certainly no blunders, but inaccuracies. But once he got to this position, a6 and rook a8, we saw Morphy take complete control of the game. Really nice positional game. Hope you enjoyed that. Let me know what you think. What do you think of Morphy's play? You know, is there another Morphy game that you'd like me to take a look at? Thanks for watching.